My name is Rebecca Hayes, and I'm 31 years old. For the past 8 years, I've worked as a gate guard at Fort Carson Army Base here in Colorado. Most people think my job is just sitting in a booth checking IDs, but there's so much more responsibility that comes with protecting a military installation. The morning of my younger sister Emma's wedding, I stared at my reflection in the mirror, wondering if today would finally be the day my family stopped treating me like their biggest disappointment. Little did I know that by evening's end, everything they thought they knew about my life would be completely shattered. Before I share what happened when Emma decided to humiliate me in front of 300 guests, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and please hit that like button and subscribe, because what her military groom did next will absolutely blow your mind. Growing up in our upper-middle-class neighborhood in Colorado Springs, I was always the square peg trying to fit into the round hole of the Hayes family expectations. Dad worked as a successful financial advisor managing portfolios for wealthy clients throughout the region, while Mom had built her reputation as one of the city's most sought-after real estate agents. They were the kind of power couple who attended charity galas and country club events, always impeccably dressed and socially connected. Emma, who was 4 years younger than me, had always been their pride and joy. She excelled in everything she touched, from academics to athletics to social situations. She graduated summa cum laude from the University of Colorado with a degree in international business, then landed a coveted position at a multinational consulting firm in Denver. Her trajectory seemed effortlessly upward, each achievement celebrated with family dinners and social media posts that our parents shared with obvious pride. My path had been different from the start. I struggled with traditional academics, finding classroom learning restrictive and uninspiring. While Emma collected awards and accolades, I was the kid who preferred hands-on work, who found satisfaction in practical problem-solving rather than theoretical discussions. When I graduated high school with mediocre grades, the disappointment in my parents' eyes was unmistakable. College lasted exactly 1 semester. The University of Northern Colorado felt like an expensive way to continue being mediocre at things that didn't interest me. When I announced I was dropping out to pursue a career in security work, the family reaction was swift and brutal. Dad called it throwing my life away, while Mom worried about what she would tell her friends when they asked about her daughter's careers. My decision to work at Fort Carson wasn't random or impulsive. I had always been drawn to structure, discipline, and the sense of purpose that came with protecting something important. The application process was rigorous, requiring extensive background checks, psychological evaluations, and specialized training. But once I was accepted, I knew I had found my calling. The work itself was far more complex than anyone in my family understood or cared to learn about. As a civilian security specialist, I was responsible for monitoring all vehicle and pedestrian traffic entering and exiting the base. This involved operating sophisticated scanning equipment, coordinating with multiple law enforcement agencies, and maintaining detailed logs of all security incidents. I worked closely with military police intelligence officers and federal agents, often handling situations that required quick thinking and absolute discretion. But try explaining that to my family during our monthly dinners. The conversation would always follow the same pattern. Dad would ask about Emma's latest business trip or promotion opportunity, while Mom would share updates about Emma's social life and dating prospects. When they remembered to ask about my work, their eyes would glaze over as I tried to explain the importance of installation security. "That's nice, Rebecca," Mom would say with thinly veiled disinterest. "Emma, tell us about that client presentation you mentioned." The subtle put-downs were constant and relentless. At family gatherings, when relatives asked what I did for work, I'd watch Mom's expression tighten with embarrassment. She'd quickly pivot the conversation to Emma's accomplishments or make vague references to me still finding my direction. Meanwhile, Emma's career milestones were announced like royal proclamations, complete with detailed explanations of her responsibilities and future prospects. I tried not to internalize their disappointment, but family dynamics have a way of seeping into your self-perception despite your best efforts. I lived in a modest apartment near the base, drove a practical used truck that served my needs, and had managed to build a small savings account through careful budgeting. By any reasonable measure, I was a responsible, independent adult with a stable career and clear sense of purpose. But in the Hayes family narrative, I remained the underachiever, the daughter who had settled for less when she could have achieved more. When Emma announced her engagement to Captain Michael Rodriguez in February, I felt a genuine surge of happiness for her. Despite the complicated dynamics between us, she was still my sister, and I wanted her to find love and fulfillment. Michael seemed like a good match for her, a decorated Army officer with an impressive service record and clear career trajectory. What surprised me was Emma's invitation to be her maid of honor. We had never been particularly close, our relationship more characterized by polite distance than sisterly intimacy. But her phone call that evening carried an unusual warmth. "Rebecca, I know we haven't always connected the way sisters should," she said, her voice softer than usual. "But you're my only sister, and I can't imagine getting married without you standing beside me as my maid of honor." The invitation felt like an olive branch, a chance to rebuild our relationship on more solid ground. Maybe the wedding would mark a turning point, an opportunity for Emma to see me as more than just the family disappointment. Maybe finally being included in something central to her life would bridge the emotional distance that had grown between us over the years. My optimism lasted until the first dress appointment. Emma had chosen an exclusive bridal boutique in Denver's Cherry Creek shopping district, the kind of place where appointments were booked months in advance and every dress cost more than most people's monthly salary. The other bridesmaids were her college sorority sisters and work colleagues, sophisticated women with advanced degrees and corporate positions who spoke casually about their vacation homes and European business trips. As I stood on the fitting platform, wearing the elegant navy blue gown Emma had selected for her bridal party, I overheard her conversation with Mom in the corner of the boutique. "I just hope she doesn't look too out of place in the photos," Emma murmured, studying me critically. "Look at her posture, Mom. She stands like she's still at that security gate." Mom's response felt like a knife to my chest. "Don't worry, sweetheart. We'll make sure she gets proper coaching before the wedding. Maybe some lessons on how to carry herself more elegantly. We can't have her looking like military personnel in your wedding photos." Standing there in that beautiful dress, surrounded by women who saw me as a project to be fixed rather than a person to be valued, I felt the familiar sting of family disappointment. My posture wasn't the result of poor breeding or lack of sophistication, it was the product of years spent maintaining professional alertness and physical readiness. But to them, it was just another sign of my inability to fit into their world. The engagement party at the country club was even worse. Emma and Michael moved through the crowd like celebrities accepting congratulations and basking in the attention of family friends and business associates. I found myself relegated to conversations with distant relatives and family acquaintances, people who knew enough about me to ask polite questions, but not enough to sustain meaningful dialogue. When Michael's military colleagues attended the party, I thought I might finally find some common ground for conversation. Instead, I found myself explaining over and over that I worked in civilian security support, watching their interest evaporate as they realized I wasn't military personnel or even a federal agent. One conversation particularly stung. I was speaking with a major about base security protocols when his wife joined our discussion. "What branch of service were you in?" she asked with polite interest. "Actually, I'm civilian personnel," I replied. "I work installation security at Fort Carson." Her smile remained fixed but grew noticeably cooler. "Oh, well, security work is certainly important." The conversation died immediately, and they soon excused themselves to discuss Michael's upcoming deployment with other military families. I spent the rest of the evening making small talk with people who clearly saw me as Emma's less successful sister, the family member who required polite acknowledgement, but not genuine engagement. Despite these warning signs, I threw myself into wedding planning with determination and hope. I took on extra shifts at the base to afford the expensive maid of honor responsibilities from the designer shoes Emma had selected to my contribution to her elaborate bachelorette weekend in Aspen. I even used my vacation time to help with wedding preparations, driving to vendor appointments, and coordinating details that Emma was too busy to handle herself. The rehearsal dinner at the Broadmoor Hotel was my first real glimpse into Michael's world. His family represented generations of military service, with his father being a retired colonel and his mother coming from a long line of officers' wives. These were people who understood military life, who respected the discipline and sacrifice that came with serving your country. I approached the evening with cautious optimism, thinking that maybe Michael's family would appreciate my connection to military life, even as a civilian employee. Instead, I found myself once again explaining my support role and watching interest fade from their faces as they realized I wasn't someone they considered significant in their military social hierarchy. The morning of Emma's wedding dawned bright and clear, with the kind of September weather that makes Colorado famous for outdoor celebrations. The ceremony was being held at the Garden of the Gods Club, an exclusive venue with breathtaking views of the red rock formations that attract visitors from around the world. Everything about the day was designed to be picture-perfect, from the imported orchids to the live string ensemble playing during the prelude. I arrived at the bridal suite early, hoping to help with final preparations and perhaps find a quiet moment to connect with Emma before the day's festivities began. Instead, I walked into what felt more like a professional photo shoot than a family gathering. Emma sat in the center of the room like a queen holding court, surrounded by her bridesmaids, who were all receiving professional hair and makeup services from a team of artists who had been flown in from Los Angeles. "Rebecca, thank goodness you're here," Emma's voice cut through the orchestrated chaos. "We need to discuss your hair situation. The stylist says your cut is going to be really challenging to work with for the photos." I touched my practical shoulder-length hair, styled in the same simple way I had worn it for years. It was clean, healthy, and professional, but apparently not sophisticated enough for Emma's vision of her perfect wedding party. The hairstylist, a thin man with severe black-rimmed glasses and an expression of artistic suffering, sighed dramatically as he approached me. "We'll do what we can," he murmured to Emma as if I weren't standing right there. "But this length and texture aren't giving us much to work with. Very utilitarian." As he worked on transforming my hair into something more acceptable, I listened to the easy conversation flowing around the room. The other bridesmaids discussed their careers at investment firms and marketing agencies, their graduate school plans, their boyfriends who were doctors and lawyers. They spoke in a language of ambition and achievement that I understood intellectually but wasn't permitted to participate in socially. "Rebecca," Emma called from across the room as her makeup artist applied what looked like pounds of foundation and contouring products. "You're being awfully quiet over there. Are you nervous about being in front of all these important people today?" The question was phrased as concern, but I heard the underlying message. She was reminding everyone in the room that I didn't naturally belong in this world of important people and significant achievements. The other bridesmaids glanced at me with expressions ranging from curiosity to pity, and I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "I'm fine," I replied, keeping my voice steady and professional. "Just taking everything in." One of the bridesmaids, a perfectly groomed brunette named Jessica, who worked in corporate communications, turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Emma mentioned you work at the Army base. That must be so different from what we're used to. Do you find it fulfilling?" Before I could formulate a response, Emma laughed. "Rebecca has always preferred simple work environments. She likes jobs where the expectations are clear and she doesn't have to navigate complex social dynamics. Right, Rebecca?" The room fell silent for a moment, and I felt every pair of eyes focused on me. The makeup artist paused in his work, sensing that this wasn't a moment that should be captured in the behind-the-scenes photos. Even the photographer lowered her camera, recognizing the tension in the air. "Actually," I began, but Emma was already moving on, turning her attention back to her reflection in the mirror and launching into a detailed discussion about the ceremony timeline with her wedding planner. The moment passed, but I remained frozen in my chair while the hairstylist continued transforming my appearance, Emma's words echoing in my head like a judgment that had been passed without trial or appeal. Simple work environments, clear expectations, no complex social dynamics. The wedding ceremony was flawless in every detail. Emma looked absolutely radiant in her custom designer gown, walking down the petal-strewn aisle to Michael, who waited at the altar with the bearing and composure of a man accustomed to ceremony and tradition. I stood with the other bridesmaids holding my bouquet of white peonies and trying to focus on the beauty of the moment rather than the growing anxiety in my chest. Michael cut an impressive figure in his dress blue uniform, his chest decorated with ribbons and medals that spoke to years of distinguished service and leadership. He was handsome in that clean-cut military way with sharp features and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. During the ceremony, I noticed him occasionally glancing toward the bridal party, though his gaze seemed to pass over all of us with professional detachment. The reception that followed was everything Emma had envisioned and more. The ballroom had been transformed into a sophisticated wonderland with thousands of white flowers, crystal chandeliers, and ambient lighting that made every guest look like they belonged in a magazine spread. The guest list read like a directory of Colorado Springs social and business elite, mixed with military personnel whose dress uniforms added an air of honor and gravitas to the celebration. I found myself seated at table 8, positioned strategically near the back of the room, with distant relatives and family acquaintances I barely knew. It was the kind of table where conversations centered around safe topics like the weather and compliments about the venue subjects that didn't require personal revelation or genuine connection. From my vantage point, I could observe the head table where Emma and Michael sat with their immediate families and wedding party. Emma glowed with happiness, graciously accepting congratulations and reveling in the attention of everyone around her. Mom and Dad flanked the couple, beaming with pride at their daughter's perfect day and advantageous marriage to a rising military officer. I genuinely tried to focus on the positive aspects of the evening. The food was exceptional, the music was elegant, and despite everything, I felt real joy watching Emma so radiant and fulfilled. She had found someone who clearly adored her, and they were beginning their life together, surrounded by people who supported and celebrated them. But as the evening progressed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching the celebration through glass, like someone observing a party they weren't truly invited to join. During the cocktail hour, I had attempted to engage with Michael's military colleagues, thinking we might find common ground in our shared connection to base life. Instead, I found myself repeatedly explaining that I worked in civilian support services, watching polite interest drain from their faces as they realized I wasn't military personnel or even a government contractor in any capacity they considered noteworthy. One conversation was particularly deflating. I was discussing base security protocols with a lieutenant colonel when his wife approached our group. "Are you military as well?" she asked pleasantly. "I'm civilian personnel," I replied. "I work in installation security at Fort Carson." Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the way people's faces change when they realize they've mistaken someone for being more important than they actually are. "Oh, well, security is certainly crucial work." The conversation died after that polite acknowledgement, and they soon found reasons to excuse themselves and join discussions with people they considered more worthy of their social attention. As dinner concluded and the dancing portion of the evening began, I found myself increasingly isolated at my assigned table. The other bridesmaids were swept onto the dance floor by groomsmen and eligible bachelor guests, while I remained seated nursing a glass of wine and watching the fairy tale unfold around me like a movie I wasn't actually part of. That's when Emma decided it was time for her maid of honor speech. The moment Emma tapped her champagne flute with a silver knife, the entire ballroom fell into expectant silence. The live band lowered their instruments, and all eyes turned toward the head table, where she stood absolutely luminous in her wedding gown, her face flushed with happiness and perhaps a touch too much celebratory champagne. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the excellent sound system. "This has been the most magical day of my life, and having all of you here to witness Michael and me beginning our journey together means more than I can express." The crowd responded with warm murmurs of approval, and I found myself genuinely smiling despite the evening's earlier tensions. Whatever our complicated history, this was Emma's moment to shine, and she deserved to bask in the love and support surrounding her. She continued with gracious acknowledgments of her new in-laws, heartfelt appreciation for Michael's military service, and grateful recognition of the vendors and staff who had made the day possible. Then she turned her attention to personal acknowledgments, beginning with our parents. I have to thank my incredible parents, Emma said, gesturing toward Mom and Dad with obvious affection. They've supported every dream I've ever had, believed in my potential, even when I doubted myself, and taught me that with dedication and hard work, there are no limits to what you can achieve. Mom dabbed at her eyes with her embroidered handkerchief, while Dad stood briefly to acknowledge the sustained applause from guests who knew the Hayes family well. And I want to thank my beautiful bridesmaids, Emma continued, who have been such important parts of my journey and have made this day even more special by standing beside me. She went through each bridesmaid individually, sharing personal anecdotes and expressing specific gratitude. Jessica, who had been her sorority big sister and career mentor. Amanda, who had supported her through graduate school applications and job interviews. Caroline, who had introduced her to the professional networking group where she'd ultimately met Michael. Then she reached me. "And my maid of honor, my sister Rebecca," Emma said, and I felt a flutter of hope in my chest. Maybe this would be the moment she acknowledged our relationship with genuine warmth, when she said something that demonstrated she valued having me in her life despite our differences. Instead, what emerged from her mouth made me feel like I'd been physically struck. Well, she's just a gate guard. Who would really want someone like that? The words hit the room like a sonic boom. For a heartbeat, there was complete silence as 300 guests processed what they had just heard. Then, like a dam, bursting laughter began to ripple through the crowd. Not uncomfortable chuckling or nervous giggling, but genuine, hearty laughter from people who found Emma's observation genuinely amusing. I sat paralyzed in my chair, feeling like every pair of eyes in the ballroom had suddenly laser-focused on me. My face burned with humiliation as the laughter grew louder and more sustained, and I could see people at nearby tables turning to stare at me, their expressions ranging from amused to genuinely pitying. But Emma wasn't finished with her public execution. "I mean, seriously, what kind of career is that?" she continued, clearly emboldened by the crowd's enthusiastic response. "Sitting in a little booth all day, checking IDs and raising gate arms? It's not exactly brain surgery, is it?" The laughter that erupted was even louder and more cruel, and I felt tears beginning to sting behind my eyes. This wasn't sisterly teasing or playful family banter. This was deliberate, calculated humiliation designed to establish a social hierarchy in front of everyone who mattered to our family's reputation. That's when Mom decided to join the public demolition of my dignity. Rising from her seat at the head table, with the authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention, Mom raised her own champagne glass and addressed the crowd with a voice that carried the confidence of years spent closing high-stakes real estate deals. "She's the shame of this family," Mom announced, her words crisp and clear through the microphone system. "Always has been, probably always will be." The laughter that greeted this proclamation was different in quality, louder and more sustained, but also more uncomfortable. Some guests were now shifting in their seats and exchanging glances, sensing that this had crossed a line from playful family teasing into something more cruel and deliberate. But nobody spoke up. Nobody defended me. I wanted to disappear completely, to melt into the floor, or run from the room, but my legs felt like concrete. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but sit there and absorb the complete annihilation of my dignity in front of 300 witnesses. Emma wasn't done twisting the knife. "Michael is so accomplished, so distinguished," she continued, gesturing toward her new husband with obvious pride. "Can you imagine if he had ended up with someone like Rebecca instead? What would people think of a decorated army captain married to a gate guard?" The cruelty was breathtaking in its thoroughness. This wasn't just about my job or career choices. This was about my fundamental value as a human being, being debated and dismissed in front of everyone who had ever mattered to my family's social standing. I looked desperately toward Dad, hoping for some intervention or support, but he remained seated at the head table, his face carefully neutral. He wasn't going to rescue me from this public humiliation. The laughter was finally beginning to subside, but Emma had one final devastating blow to deliver. "I love my sister, I really do," she said with saccharine sweetness that made the words even more painful. "But let's be honest about reality. Some people are destined for greatness, and others—" She shrugged dramatically. Others are meant to check IDs at Army base gates. The silence that followed Emma's final insult was so profound, it felt like the entire ballroom had been placed under a spell. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears as I sat there completely eviscerated in front of everyone who had ever mattered to my family. The laughter had finally died completely, leaving behind an atmosphere so charged with tension it felt almost electric. Then something completely unexpected happened. Michael stood up. His movement was sudden and deliberate, his chair scraping against the polished floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the silent ballroom. Every head in the room turned toward him as he rose to his full height, his dress blue uniform immaculate, his face set in an expression I couldn't immediately interpret. For several long seconds, he simply stood there surveying the crowd with the kind of commanding presence that comes from years of military leadership. Then slowly and with unmistakable intentionality, he turned toward my table and executed a formal military bow. Not a casual nod or polite acknowledgement, but a full ceremonial bow that conveyed deep respect and recognition. "Actually," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system as Emma's microphone picked up his words, "she's my commanding officer." The silence that followed was so complete, it felt like the entire world had stopped breathing. Michael continued, his voice steady and authoritative. "Rebecca Hayes is Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Hayes, my direct superior at Fort Carson. She has been conducting a highly classified security assessment for the past 3 years, operating under deep cover to evaluate our installation's vulnerability to both external threats and internal security breaches." I watched in stunned disbelief as every face in the room turned toward me with expressions of shock and bewilderment. Emma's champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered against the floor, the sound sharp and final in the otherwise silent ballroom. "The position she has maintained as a gate guard," Michael continued with military precision, "has been essential to her mission. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes has been systematically evaluating every aspect of our base security, from personnel verification procedures to vehicle inspection protocols to emergency response coordination. I have been providing her with weekly classified reports for the past 2 years." Mom's face had gone completely white. She gripped the edge of the table so hard, her knuckles stood out like marble sculptures, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the horror and shock in her expression. Michael wasn't finished. "Lieutenant Colonel Hayes' work has been instrumental in identifying and correcting 17 major security vulnerabilities that could have compromised national security and endangered the lives of military personnel and their families. Her dedication to this mission, often at significant personal cost, exemplifies the highest standards of military service and sacrifice." The transformation in the room was immediate and total. Military personnel throughout the ballroom began straightening in their seats, many rising to their feet out of respect. Conversations that had been filled with cruel laughter moments before were now replaced by hushed discussions as people struggled to process this complete reversal of everything they thought they understood. Furthermore, Michael said, his voice taking on an edge that suggested he was personally offended by what he had witnessed, "Lieutenant Colonel Hayes holds a master's degree in security studies from the War College Advanced Certifications in Counterintelligence Operations and has received commendations from the Department of Defense for her innovative approaches to installation security. She is one of the most highly qualified and respected officers in her field." I sat in my chair feeling like I was watching this scene unfold from outside my own body. The woman who had been publicly humiliated and ridiculed moments before had suddenly become the central figure in a completely different narrative, one that cast her tormentors as ignorant and cruel, rather than superior and justified. Emma had collapsed back into her chair, her face a mask of absolute horror as she began to comprehend the magnitude of what had just happened. She had not only publicly mocked and humiliated her own sister, but she had done so to a superior military officer in front of a room full of witnesses that included her new husband's colleagues, superiors, and subordinates. "The mission has required absolute operational security," I said, finally finding my voice and rising from my seat with the bearing and confidence of someone accustomed to command authority. My family was not informed of my actual role or rank for security reasons that I'm sure you can all understand. My voice was steady, professional, and carried the unmistakable authority of someone who was used to being listened to and obeyed without question. The contrast with the broken, humiliated woman who had been sitting silently through her sister's cruel attack was stark and undeniable. Michael executed a crisp military salute in my direction. "Thank you for your service and sacrifice, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes," he said with formal respect that resonated throughout the silent ballroom. One by one, other military personnel in the room stood and saluted as well. The sound of chairs scraping against the floor and dress shoes clicking together filled the space, as what had been a wedding reception transformed into something resembling a military ceremony of respect and recognition. The aftermath of Michael's revelation was swift, devastating, and irreversible. Emma remained slumped in her chair, staring at me with an expression of such complete horror that I almost felt sorry for her. She had not only destroyed her own wedding reception with her cruelty, but she had publicly humiliated a superior military officer in front of witnesses that included some of the most important people in Colorado's military and business communities. Mom desperately tried to backtrack, rising from her seat with trembling hands extended toward me in a gesture of supplication. "Rebecca, sweetheart, we had absolutely no idea," she stammered, her voice shaking with panic. "If we had known about your real position and rank, we never would have, but the damage was complete and irreversible, and everyone in the room understood that perfectly." The words couldn't be taken back, the laughter couldn't be unheard, and the deliberate cruelty couldn't be excused by claims of ignorance about my actual position and accomplishments. Dad finally stood up, his face grave with the realization that his family had just committed a social and professional catastrophe of epic proportions. As a financial advisor who worked with many military families and defense contractors, he understood better than anyone the implications of what had just transpired in front of these witnesses. "Lieutenant Colonel Hayes," he said formally, his voice carrying across the now silent ballroom with the respect that should have been accorded to me from the beginning. "Please accept our family's most sincere and heartfelt apologies for this terrible misunderstanding." The formality of his address to his own daughter spoke volumes about how completely the family dynamic had shifted in the space of 5 minutes. I was no longer Rebecca, the disappointing daughter who had failed to live up to their expectations and social standards. I was Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, a superior military officer who had been publicly disrespected and humiliated by civilians who should have known better. Michael's military colleagues began approaching my table, their previous dismissiveness completely replaced by the respectful attention due to a superior officer. Lieutenant Colonel Williams, who had barely acknowledged my existence earlier in the evening, now stood at attention as he addressed me directly. "Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, if I may say so, your operational security was absolutely flawless," he said with obvious admiration. "I had no idea of your actual position or the nature of your mission at the base." "That was precisely the point, Colonel Williams," I replied, my voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to successful command operations. The assessment required a completely authentic cover identity to be effective. As word of my true identity and rank spread throughout the ballroom, I watched the social hierarchy of the evening undergo a complete and total inversion. People who had ignored me or treated me with polite condescension now actively sought my attention and approval. Wedding guests who had laughed at Emma's cruel jokes now looked deeply uncomfortable and ashamed of their participation in my public humiliation. But the person I felt most conflicted about was Michael himself. He stood at the head table looking genuinely distressed, caught between his professional respect for his commanding officer and his personal loyalty to his new wife. The joy and celebration of his wedding day had been completely destroyed by Emma's cruelty and his own moral decision to defend me when no one else would. I made my way through the crowd toward the head table, graciously accepting congratulations and expressions of respect from people who had dismissed me as irrelevant just hours earlier. When I reached Emma, she looked up at me with tears streaming down her face, her perfect wedding makeup ruined by the magnitude of her emotional breakdown. "Rebecca," she whispered brokenly, "I'm so incredibly sorry. I had no idea. I never meant—" "This isn't about my rank or my job or my mission, Emma," I said quietly. leaning down so only she could hear me over the murmur of conversations around us. "This is about how you chose to treat your own sister. This is about the deliberate cruelty you showed to someone you claim to love." She broke down completely, then sobbing into her hands as the full weight of her actions and their consequences crashed down on her. She had not only destroyed her own wedding reception and humiliated herself in front of everyone she wanted to impress, but she had potentially damaged her new husband's military career and social standing in the process. "I was jealous," she choked out between sobs, her voice barely audible. "I was always so jealous that you seemed content with your life, while I was constantly struggling to prove myself to everyone. I wanted to feel superior to you just once, to feel like I had finally won at something." The admission was heartbreaking in its honesty and self-awareness, but it couldn't change what had happened or undo the public humiliation I had endured. The cruel laughter I had absorbed wasn't just about sibling rivalry or competitive dynamics, it was about a fundamental lack of respect and love that had been building and festering for years. Michael approached us cautiously, his face a carefully controlled mask of professional composure that barely contained his personal anguish and conflict. "Lieutenant Colonel Hayes," he said with formal respect, "I want to personally apologize for my wife's behavior tonight. There is absolutely no excuse for the disrespect and humiliation you were subjected to." I looked at this young officer, who had risked his own comfort and potentially his relationship with his new bride to defend me, when it would have been much easier and safer to remain silent. "Captain Rodriguez," I replied, using his formal rank and title. "You demonstrated integrity and moral courage when it mattered most. That speaks very well of your character and your potential as a leader." The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of awkward conversations, failed attempts to salvage what remained of the celebration, and uncomfortable interactions between people who were struggling to process what they had witnessed. Many guests left early, the festive atmosphere completely destroyed by the revelation and its dramatic aftermath. The photographer stopped taking pictures, the band played to an increasingly empty dance floor, and the fairy tale wedding Emma had planned became a cautionary tale about the dangers of cruelty and the importance of treating all people with respect and dignity. 2 years have passed since that catastrophic wedding night, and the ripple effects continue to shape every relationship in my family. Emma and Michael's marriage survived, but only after months of intensive counseling and serious soul-searching on Emma's part. She had to confront not just her treatment of me, but the fundamental attitudes and insecurities that had led to such a spectacular and public failure of character. The video footage of that evening, captured by multiple wedding guests on their phones, never made it to social media, thanks to Michael's quick thinking and some strategic conversations with key witnesses. But the story spread through Colorado Springs military and social circles anyway, becoming a cautionary tale about the importance of treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their apparent social status or job title. My relationship with my parents has been permanently and irrevocably altered. Dad, whose business depends heavily on his reputation and relationships within the military community, was horrified by the potential professional implications of that night. He has made numerous attempts to rebuild our relationship and repair the damage, but trust once shattered so completely and publicly proves nearly impossible to restore to its original form. Mom has struggled more deeply with the revelation that her assumptions about my life, career, and accomplishments were so completely and fundamentally wrong. She had invested years in a narrative where I was the family failure, the daughter who had settled for less when she could have achieved more. Adjusting to a reality where I was actually more successful and accomplished than she had ever imagined required a complete reconstruction of her worldview and self-perception. As for Emma, she has made genuine, sustained efforts to apologize and rebuild our relationship from the ground up. She enrolled in therapy to address the insecurity, competitiveness, and cruelty that had driven her behavior, and she has made a point of publicly acknowledging my military service and accomplishments whenever the opportunity arises. But some wounds cut too deep to heal completely, and while I have forgiven her, I can never completely forget the deliberate cruelty she showed me in front of everyone who mattered to our family. My military career, somewhat ironically, has actually benefited from the unexpected exposure. The successful completion of my security assessment led to a promotion and transfer to a highly coveted position at the Pentagon, where I now work on classified projects that I cannot discuss but that contribute significantly to national security operations. The respect and recognition I had been unconsciously seeking from my family my entire life came instead from my professional accomplishments and colleagues who valued my skills, dedication, and integrity. I learned something profound and life-changing that night about the difference between seeking external validation and maintaining internal self-respect. For years, I had allowed my family's lack of understanding and support to make me question my own choices, value, and worth as a person. I had tried desperately to earn their approval by being the perfect daughter, sister, and family member, even as they made it increasingly clear that nothing I accomplished would ever be sufficient to earn their respect or pride. But watching Emma publicly mock and humiliate me taught me that some people's approval simply isn't worth seeking or maintaining. When someone's love for you is conditional on your willingness to be diminished, criticized, and made to feel lesser, it isn't really love at all. It's a power dynamic disguised as a familial relationship. The military taught me that genuine respect is earned through competence, integrity, dedication, and service to something larger than yourself. My family taught me the equally valuable lesson that some people will never respect you regardless of what you accomplish or achieve, and that their inability to recognize your worth is a reflection of their character and limitations, not yours. Michael and I have maintained our professional relationship, though it required some time and effort for things to return to a comfortable normal. He was promoted to major 8 months after the wedding and has continued to build a reputation as one of the most respected and principled officers in our command structure. His decision to defend me that night at considerable personal and professional risk earned him a reputation for integrity and moral courage that has served his career extremely well. I discovered a different kind of family among my military colleagues, people who valued loyalty, competence, honor, and mutual respect over social status, family connections, or traditional measures of civilian success. These relationships, built on shared purpose and genuine respect, proved far more sustaining and meaningful than the blood relationships that had caused me so much pain and self-doubt over the years. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me that Emma's attempt to publicly establish her superiority and success over me had exactly the opposite effect she intended. In trying to diminish me, she revealed her own character to everyone in that ballroom. In trying to make me appear small and unsuccessful, she made herself look petty, cruel, and fundamentally insecure. In trying to establish herself as the accomplished sister, she demonstrated that professional success without basic kindness and human decency is ultimately hollow and meaningless. I think about that night regularly, not with anger, resentment, or desire for revenge, but with a kind of sad gratitude for the painful but valuable lessons it taught me. It was excruciating to endure in the moment, but it clarified so many things about self-worth, family dynamics, authentic relationships, and the critical importance of surrounding yourself with people who build you up, rather than systematically tearing you down. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally and support you through everything are actually the ones who cause you the most damage and pain. But their treatment of you doesn't define your worth, determine your potential, or limit your future possibilities. Real family isn't always about biological relationships and blood ties. It's about the people who recognize your value, support your dreams and aspirations, and stand up for you when it matters most. I hope Emma has found happiness in her marriage and learned lasting lessons from that terrible experience. I hope my parents eventually came to understand that their conditional love and constant comparisons damaged both their daughters in different but equally harmful ways. But mostly I hope that anyone who has ever felt diminished, criticized, or made to feel lesser by people who should be lifting them up remembers that other people's opinions are just that, opinions and perspectives, not objective facts about who you are or what you're capable of achieving. The gate guard they mocked and humiliated that night was actually a lieutenant colonel with advanced degrees and significant accomplishments. But more importantly, she was a woman of integrity, competence, dedication, and quiet strength who deserved respect and recognition, regardless of her rank, position, or professional achievements. It just took a public revelation and intervention to make that reality clear to everyone else in the room. Have you ever experienced family dynamics that taught you important lessons about self-worth, respect, and the difference between conditional and unconditional love? Have you ever had people's assumptions about your life or accomplishments proven completely wrong in a dramatic way? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you in any way. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming family challenges, finding your authentic path to success, and learning to value yourself regardless of other people's opinions or expectations. Please share this video with anyone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by other people's approval or recognition. Thank you for listening to my story with such attention and care. And remember that sometimes the most profound personal growth comes from the most painful and difficult experiences. May you find the strength, courage, and wisdom to stand up for yourself when it matters most. And may you always remember that you deserve respect, recognition, and love exactly as you are.